Well, I'm delighted to be with you. This is a real treat to see so many names that I'm familiar with and names that I'm not familiar with. I'm going to invite you to join me on a journey today. I'm not exactly sure where we're going or where we're going to end up, and I promise that I'm going to raise more questions than I have answers. So that is to say that I'm looking forward to the conversation we have after this is over. So let's get right to it. Why isn't my screen advancing? Okay, there it goes. On Saturday, October 27, 2018, 46-year-old Robert Gregory Bowers entered the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh and started shooting. He was armed with an AR-15 semi-automatic rifle and three .357 semi-automatic pistols, all of which he fired during the attack that lasted 20 minutes. 8 people were killed, ranging in age from 54 to 97. At one point during the attack, Bowers shouted, "All Jews must die." On August 3rd, 2019, Patrick Wood Crusius walked into a Walmart in El Paso, Texas, armed with a semi-automatic version of an AK-47. The 21-year-old had driven across Texas to kill Mexicans. In social media posts, Crusius embraced the Great Replacement, the notion that people of color represent a threat to white people. The shooting resulted in 23 deaths, 13 Americans, 8 Mexicans, 1 German, and the youngest being 15 years old. On May 14, 2022, at about 2:30 in the afternoon, Peyton S. Gendron arrived at the Tops supermarket in Buffalo, New York, armed with an AR-15 style rifle, a hunting rifle, and a shotgun. He wore body armor, a military helmet, and a head-mounted camera. As he got out of his car, he said to himself, "Just gotta go for it." Gendron shot 4 people in the parking lot, killing 3. He entered the store, yelling racial slurs, and shot 8 more people, killing 6. An armed security guard shot Gendron, but because of the body armor he was wearing, the guard's bullet didn't stop him. The security guard, Aaron Salter Jr., was shot and killed. Gendron's victims, all Black, ranged in age from 32 to 86. Gendron had driven 3.5 hours, about 200 miles, because he said he wanted to kill Blacks. As of the end of June, 340 mass shootings, defined by killing 4 or more people, killed 416 people in the United States. 6 shootings occurred at a school or university. Usually after an event such as this, the Adventist Church, either at the General Conference or at the North American Division level, issues a statement. And the statement always says, we deplore incidents such as this. But the question I want to ask this afternoon is, what are they doing about it? What actions are we taking? In 2018, a woman named Beth, not her real name, found out she was pregnant. She wasn't in a position to have a baby, so she made an appointment with the local abortion clinic. When she arrived for her appointment, she saw 2 buildings with similar logos and names. One was called Florida Women's Center, and the other was Women's Help Center. She entered the help center, filled out a form with her medical information, and met a woman named Patricia who wore a white lab coat. After Patricia asked some questions, Beth asked, "You're not giving me the pill today?" Patricia said, "Yeah, we're not doing the abortion, but let's do an ultrasound and see where you're at." When Beth realized she had gone to the wrong building, she went to the Florida Women's Center, and she was told that she was not the only person to whom this had happened. The Florida Department of Health eventually got involved and found out that Patricia wasn't a doctor. She was a radiology tech whose license had expired. The Florida Health Department also identified 7 other women who had been deceived by Patricia and the Women's Health Center into believing that they were going to get abortions when they weren't. A woman's health clinic is one of about 2,500 crisis pregnancy centers across the US designed to prevent women from getting abortions. They operate on a model known as the Pearson Manual, written by a man named Robert Pearson, a devout Catholic building contractor who's been fighting legalized abortion since the 1960s. His manual is called How to Start and Operate Your Own Pro-Life Outreach Crisis Pregnancy Center. Their method is to use deception, among other things, to prevent women from having abortions. So my question, while the pro-life, pro-choice debate roils the nation, what should Adventists say? What should Adventists do? Uh-oh. All right, I guess my slides are a little out of order here, so I'm going to go to the next, I'm going to skip down here. Okay. Recently, as the White House and House Republicans negotiated the raising of the debt ceiling, Republicans successfully fought to create a new work requirement for food assistance. And now I'm going to talk about a woman named Quenisha who applied for government aid. When she applied for government aid, the state of Wisconsin sent her to a company named Maximus. It's a for-profit company that works with the state to provide jobs for people on welfare. To get help, participants are required to take a class called Career Pathways 5 days a week for up to 4 weeks, unpaid. Quenisha's first job was working as a janitor in a food pantry / community center. For 40 hours a week, she earned $653, essentially $4 an hour. And with that, she's supposed to pay for rent, food, and childcare. 6 months later, Quenisha worked at a physical therapist's office as a custodian. She earned $13 an hour for 4 or 5 hours a day. And because of the way welfare works, once she got this job, her welfare check was reduced to just $200, then to just $50. She was getting $1,000 to $1,400 a month, but that wasn't enough to put her over the poverty line. 3 years later, Quenisha's salary increased to $14 to $16 an hour, depending on the shift. Then she had car trouble and she couldn't reliably get to work. So she went back to Maximus, where her unpaid work experience was at a child care center. So again, she's working for free. She eventually got hired as an assistant daycare teacher for $16 an hour with no benefits. To support her 2 kids, she got another job at Dollar Tree for $13.50 an hour. So she was working 40 hours a week at daycare, 26 hours a week at Dollar Tree. Meanwhile, when one of Maximus's participants gets a job that lasts at least a month, the state rewards the contractor with a performance outcome payment of $11,000 paid by taxpayers. So when each participant stays at a job at least a month, Maximus gets $11,000. In 10 years, the state of Minnesota paid Maximus more than $7 million, and that's in addition to the tens of millions of dollars the state already pays to administer its own welfare program. For 2020, its 2020 fiscal year, Maximus reported an annual revenue of $3.46 billion. So one has to wonder whether politicians are more concerned with the for-profit companies making millions off poor people than they are with getting people off welfare. So again, the question, what should Adventists say? What should Adventists do? How can we be involved? On January 7, 2023, 5 Memphis police officers beat 29-year-old Tyree Nichols during a traffic stop. Police body camera footage showed officers kicking him and beating him so hard with their batons that they almost fell over. Nichols died 3 days later from his injuries. In February 2019, a Taco Bell employee in Vallejo, California, called 911 to report a customer asleep in his Mercedes CLS 500. He was blocking the restaurant's drive-through. When police officers arrived, 6 in all, they noticed a pistol in Willie McCoy's lap. As McCoy woke up and moved his hand to scratch his chest, officers fired 55 shots in 3.5 seconds, believing that McCoy was reaching for his gun. A 2021 study by NPR regarding deadly police shootings found that the victims were mostly Black, the officers mostly white. 19 of the officers were rookies with less than a year on the force. One was on a job for 4 hours, another for 4 days. More than 25% of the killings took place during traffic stops. 18% of the victims suffered from mental illness. The youngest victim was a 15-year-old high school student. The oldest was a 62-year-old man killed in his Los Angeles County home. Nearly 60% of these shootings occurred in the South. More than 25% happened in the 3 states of Texas, Georgia, and Louisiana. Again, this is a problem that is huge throughout North America. And the question is, what should Adventists say? What should they do? How can they possibly get involved? I'm going to tell a story now that I've told before, but it's a favorite of mine because I know the pastor that it concerns. It concerns a man named Miguel who attended a large Adventist church in a major metropolitan area in the 1980s. A wide smile always graced Miguel's face, and because of his outgoing personality, everyone knew Miguel, and Miguel, it seemed, knew everybody. The church pastor instituted a prayer meeting on Wednesday mornings at 10 a.m. for people who didn't like to be out after dark. So the weekly gathering was attended mostly by old women and Miguel. Miguel had a secret. He was gay. And in the course of time, he discovered that he had AIDS. And that was when being diagnosed with AIDS amounted to having a death sentence. Because so much about AIDS was unknown at the time, a number of false prejudicial rumors circulated. One week at prayer meeting, Miguel felt safe sharing his secret with the women in his Bible study group. He was gay and he had AIDS. If he wondered how the women in the group would respond, he wouldn't have to wait long. One woman stood, walked over to where he sat, grabbed him by the shoulders, pulled him to his feet, and wrapped him in a hug. Soon Miguel had been hugged by all the women in the group. A little later, Miguel confided to the pastor, "I know I'm going to die, but I don't want to die alone." The pastor responded, "You will not die alone." As the disease progressed, Miguel ended up in the hospital. Every day, members of that church came to his room and sat with him. They didn't come to sing, to pray, or to give him Bible studies, just to sit with him and provide whatever comfort and support was necessary. One day, one of the unit nurses saw the pastor leave Miguel's room. "Who are you people?" she wanted to know. She pointed to a room down the hall and said, "This patient hasn't had a visitor in 2 weeks." She pointed to another room. "No one has been to see this patient in 8 days. The pastor replied, "We are Seventh-day Adventists. We're agents of God's love and mercy and grace to everyone who needs it." This was the beginning of a ministry to LGBTQ individuals and their families in that church that continues to this day. The General Conference, trying to demonstrate its faithfulness to orthodoxy in the face of increasing acceptance of LGBTQ plus people in virtually every aspect of society, recently chose to introduce a statement. This is the statement from the General Conference. In recent weeks, some local individuals, or sometimes local church organizations in their local settings, have sought to provide support for those living alternative human sexuality lifestyles that are inconsistent with our biblical understanding of this issue and published voted statements of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. For some in their local settings, there have been deliberate efforts to advance the cause of alternative human sexuality lifestyles without regard for the authority of God's word and the counsels provided in spirit of prophecy. Although these activities have been locally sponsored, through social media, they've been announced far and wide, creating confusion and concern among church members who've been asking for a clear yet kind position on the matter from church leaders at various levels. The church has recently instituted a commission on human sexuality, designed to counteract society's acceptance of homosexual behavior. It has to be said that at the outset, everyone knows what conclusions the commission will come up with, which says that the church has already made up its mind. It's just looking for texts on which to hang its bigotry. Those looking for a scholarly, balanced treatment of the topic should read Alicia Johnston's excellent book, The Bible and LGBTQ Adventists. The Commission on Human Sexuality should have this book on its reading list. The fact that it probably doesn't kind of demonstrates that it doesn't care about knowing the truth of what the Bible really says. Changing the topic slightly, let's talk about religious intolerance fueled by religious bigotry. It's been weaponized to prevent books from appearing in schools, libraries, and bookstores. Everyone, it seems, from state legislatures to school boards to concerned parents, are creating blacklists unknown since the McCarthy era. Most of the books are suspect because they're alleged support of sexual promiscuity, gender orientation, critical race theory, so-called, or historical facts deemed unflattering to certain individuals or groups. As of September 2022, PEN America identified 1,648 titles of banned books. 41% had LGBTQ plus themes, protagonists, or secondary characters. 40% had protagonists or secondary characters of color. 21% directly addressed issues of race and racism. 22% contained sexual content, that is, discussions about puberty, sex, or relationships. 10% had themes of rights and activism. 9% were biography, autobiography, or memoir. 4% had characters or stories that reflected on religious minorities. Since many of these attempts to ban books come from groups that identify as Christian nationalists, this is nothing more than the imposition of one's belief on those who don't share those beliefs. And again, Adventists have had a history of warning against people who try to impose their beliefs on others. We always assumed it had something to do with the Roman Catholic Church or apostate Protestantism. But now it seems that there are other powers at play. Most Adventists prefer a history that is simple, uncomplicated. William Miller, James and Ellen White, Uriah Smith, John Andrews. But many Adventist pioneers we could mention had a unique personality with interest and strength not typically mentioned with typical Adventist orthodoxy. In fact, you find that many Adventists had a social conscience that led them to take action. We know that Joseph Bates, for example, was a radical abolitionist. During the Mexican-American War, Bates denounced the United States as a heaven-daring, soul-destroying, neighbor-murdering country. He argued for the strict separation of church and state. He condemned alcohol, tobacco, and caffeine. And he probably became a vegetarian before Ellen White had her health reform visions. James Edson White, second son of James and Ellen White, moved to Vicksburg, Mississippi in 1894 and began working among the former slaves of the city. There in the Jim Crow South, White set up a school that served 150 students. He expanded to Yazoo City, then to Lintonia, and started a school in a private home. He had a boat built called the Morning Star And the boat had a library, a chapel, a photography lab, a print shop, and accommodation for staff. When the school outgrew its home, he oversaw the building of a movable chapel. A day school began with 15 students, and within months had 200 students. And again, this is just to remind you that this is at the height of the Jim Crow South. And Mississippi was one of the leaders that restricted the rights of Blacks to education, to voting, to other things that we consider now human rights. John Harvey Kellogg. We know John Harvey Kellogg primarily because of his falling out with some of the leaders of the church. Less well known, as they led the Seventh-day Adventist Medical Missionary and Benevolent Association. It established treatment rooms, vegetarian restaurants, and urban medical missions or clinics, and more than 30 sanitariums around the world. He also developed plans for Adventist churches to form what they called Christian help bands. And these bands consisted of a leader, a gospel worker, a nurse, and other helpers to serve the needy and disadvantaged people in the local communities. He opened the Chicago Medical Mission in South Chicago that featured a medical dispensary, free baths, free laundry, and for a time, free lunches. 3 years later, in 1896, the Working Man's Home in Chicago provided inexpensive lodging, healthful food, and temporary employment to hundreds of men. For Kellogg, a better life began now, not just when Jesus returned. This is all to say that while many Adventists are content to look forward to a new heaven and a new earth, an increasing number see the challenges facing citizens in the United States and around the world with a resolve not to sit by and just watch. More and more are looking for ways to improve the condition of those with whom they share this planet. So this afternoon, we've talked about gun violence. We've talked about systemic poverty. We've talked about the fight of pro-life and pro-choice. We've spoken about gun violence directed against by police officers against others, especially minorities. And we've talked about the importance of being socially responsible in our societies. It might be useful to go and take a look at the counsel of the prophet Amos. You know, Amos is called a minor prophet, not because his message is minor, because his message is so short. But he has one passage that talks about people who have a high regard for religious performance, but no regard for the people of their communities. He has one passage where it says in chapter 5, I despise your religious festivals. Your assemblies are a stench to me. Even though you bring me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. Though you bring choice fellowship offerings, I will have no regard for them. Away with the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the music of your harps. Notice this next verse. But let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. We Adventists like to point to our orthodoxy, to our knowledge of things prophetic. But when it comes to living prophetically, we aren't even close to living the ideal set forward in the book of Isaiah. Oh, and by the way, let me just throw in Ellen White's comment in the Ministry of Healing. Christ's method alone will give true success in reaching the people. The Savior mingled with men and women as one who desired their good. He showed his sympathy for them, ministered to their needs, won their confidence, then he bade them follow me. I'm just going to leave that there. But let me look at, there's Amos. And then I want to quote in closing from the prophet Isaiah. In contrast to the fasting and the religious performance that most people are familiar with, you know, the praying and the Bible study, Isaiah's word from the Lord is this: Is this not the kind of fasting I have chosen? To loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke? Is it not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe them and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood? Then your light will break forth like the dawn, and your healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Then you will call, and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help, and he will say, here am I. Okay, I'm finished sharing the screen. Okay. All right. So let me just to tie this up a little bit by saying that, I grew up in an Orthodox Adventist home. I'm Orthodox through and through. But as I got older, I realized that the Lord requires more from us. That in order for us to have a proper Christian witness, we have to be socially engaged with our communities. And so, now, in my professional ministry, I was part of 5-day plans to stop smoking, prophecy seminars, and cooking schools, and all those things, vacation Bible schools, and those are all good. But it seems that we're lacking a little something, that we could do more, that we can be involved in some of the organizations in our community who are making a difference in terms of gun violence, racial inequity, poverty, some of those things. So I yield the floor to anybody who wants to make a comment or a question.